Still says
Cliffhanger.
still says offline on my end. Um, maybe check Facebook and see if it's online. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. Yeah, we're live.
Okay, cool, cool. And now we're
Fair.
live on Instagram. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, you all, for tuning in tonight. I think we are live on all platforms, so we'll get started. This is Matter Monday, and I am Cassie Young, co-founder of Gray Matter Media and Matter News. This is a weekly talk show where we get to talk to interesting guests about different facets of the news industry and the media industry at large. Tonight, I'm really excited to get to interview and chat with Rosalie Murphy, who's here with us all the way from Akron. She's not here in Columbus. We're doing this remote, especially due to COVID. But she is the editor-in-chief of The Devil Strip. So if you're not familiar with The Devil Strip, I'm going to have her do the introduction to what all they do and what they're about. But they've got some really exciting, I think, things that they're doing and viewpoints that Rosalie will bring to this discussion. The topic tonight is cultivating trust in news. So that's really the broad topic we're talking about. If you saw the any of the things that we put out prior to tonight about what the topic of tonight would be, you also saw something about the myth of objectivity. So we'll probably get into that a little bit too, and kind of this idea of objectivity in the news and bias in the news, and how you can, and how newsrooms, and we might talk a bit about Matter too, but especially we'll be talking about how the Devil Strip cultivates trust within their community and for their newsroom. So thank you so much, Rosalie, for joining me tonight. I think before we dive into this topic and I start to introduce the topic a little bit more, I'm going to make a couple of announcements and I'm going to have you introduce yourself. Tonight, I just want to make a quick thank you to Night Road Studio, who is one of our partners, and they are live streaming this event, and then also to Wild Goose Creative. So they are our sponsor for the space for this event. This is not Wild Goose Creative. This is my sunroom in my home. Because of COVID, we have not been actually live streaming out of there as of recent. So thank you to Wild Goose Creative anyway. And so before we dive into kind of an intro of tonight's topic, we'll just start just generally, Rosalie, if you'll let me know who you are and what the Devil Strip is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and excited to chat about this, a topic I love to talk about. So yeah, as Cassie said, my name is Rosalie. I am the editor-in-chief of The Devil Strip. The Devil Strip, for those of you who are from Columbus, you may not be familiar with the term. This is kind of a weird local colloquialism in the Akron area, but it refers to the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the road. Clevelanders call it the tree lawn. I don't believe Columbus has a name for it. If you do, please let me know. But when our publisher and founder, Chris Horn, started the magazine going on 6 years now, the reason for choosing that name was sort of a sense of you only get it if you're from here, right? We're local, you're local, this is our thing. As we've grown and evolved, I like to think of it now as the Devil Strip is this wonderful like geographic element that connects your private life to the city and connects us to the public realm and to this world where all of us come together and to our neighbors. And that's what the Devil Strip, our publication, strives to do, is to connect people to the city in ways that are accessible and useful to make us all better neighbors, better citizens.
Wow, I love that metaphor. I knew about what a Devil Strip was. I knew the history of that, but I had never heard it tied in kind of like that. So that's beautiful. Yeah, very relevant to what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I think we chose the right guest, and I'm excited to dive in. So just to give you all who might not have thought a lot about this topic of cultivating trust in news, and if you do come up with questions for us or for Rosalie, especially during this broadcast, please do let us know in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer those. But yeah, in terms of kind of setting the stage for where we're at with cultivating trust in news, if you have never thought about this topic or researched it, just a little bit of information is that 44% of Americans, so almost half of Americans, think that the news media is performing poorly at providing objective news reports. So they don't trust that the media, or they don't believe that the media is being objective in whatever way people might define that. And then 73% of those, and I believe this is from a Knight Gallup study, and I will get you the name as soon as I can. They also found that 73% of Americans consider news media bias to be a major problem. So 73%, that's a huge portion of the American public that thinks the news media has a major problem with bias. And so this kind of leads me to this question of, and I'll be interested to weave this throughout the conversation, but there's this podcast I want anyone who's interested in diving into this topic more to know about, called The View from Somewhere. And it talks a lot, it's by a journalist named Lewis Raven Wallace, and it talks a lot about this idea of whether the news should be striving for objectivity. Is that even realistic when it comes to the fact that we all have human biases, and the things we create will take on those biases? And if objectivity isn't what we're striving for, if it's not complete objectivity, then, then I'm really interested in this question of then what are we striving for? And I think that one answer to that, or one of the answers I would give, and community newsrooms like the Double Strip, and I think Matter News answer, is cultivating trust within the community, so that regardless of who might be putting out, information through your outlet or what their views might be, if people have a deep trust for you and the people and content that are associated with your brand, that's, I think, what's really important, more so than coming off as if you have no subjectivity, no biases. So Neiman Lab, I think this is really interesting. Neiman Lab, and shout out to Marissa Twigg, my co-founder, for sending this to me right before this. They put out this predictions for journalism 2021. And I found this really interesting. There was a quote at the top that said, just as almost all sizable publishers today have audience teams, almost all will have trust teams and trust dashboards within 5 years. And so those of you who aren't as familiar with what a dashboard might be, they're basically meaning that right now newsrooms tend to look at certain metrics. Are we getting a certain amount of views, clicks, all of these things? And that's kind of what would show up on a dashboard or something that they're evaluating themselves on and using as a metric. This prediction is that trust and that kind of measurement of how much a newsroom is trusted is going to start being a bigger factor and a bigger focus for newsrooms, which I think is really an interesting prediction, given that those of us who are starting up, the Double Strip's only 6 years old. That's really not that old. Matter News is only a couple of years old. So I think that we definitely are kind of riding that same wave in some way. They said that a few types of publishers will emerge, and I'll leave it at this before I let you go more into the Double Strip, but I'm just interested to see how you might tie in the Double Strip to some of these things. They think that a few different types of publishers will emerge, or probably already are emerging. One is those with a stated viewpoint through which all is reported. And so they're saying not people who have potentially a bias, but that are willing to be upfront and honest about the viewpoint that they're coming from and that bias that they might be bringing as they're reporting. They're saying the second would be those who encourage a range of opinions, but curate them carefully to foster debate and advance understanding. So I think the Double Strip kind of reminds me a little bit of that, because you guys have, so many different community members that create your content. And then there's three, those that state loudly that they report only facts and reject opinions. So sort of your traditional, we are aiming to be objective, we're investigative, whatever it is. And I'll just say for Matter, we do actually try to do a bit of these different things. We try to be honest about who we are as people who run the company and what kind of biases and leanings and background we have. And we don't shy away from some of those things, but we also are an investigative outlet that does have rigorous standards for the way that we do our work. So I think we're a bit of a blend, and I'm really just interested to see those trends, because I think that it definitely comes out in some of the models that we employ and that you employ, and that other newsrooms do. So I've been rambling, so I'm gonna stop now, and I wanna ask you a little bit more about what y'all do. First, before we get more into the Double Strip, I would love to hear, Rosalie, just a little bit more, because I don't know myself, about your personal background, especially as it relates to journalism, but you can also, of course, go into other things.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Greater Akron, in a town called Talmadge, which is just east of the city. My family has been in Akron for like 3 or 4 generations. My grandparents grew up here, like a lot of families in this part of the country. When I was 17 years old, I was coming. When you grow up in cities that are shrinking, you kind of grow up steeped in these narratives of this place is in decline and, you know, you need to leave. And that's what I did. I left for college. I studied journalism at the University of Southern California. I got my first job at a local newspaper in Palm Springs, where I spent 3 years, and just really fell in love with local news, the variety of stories that could be told, the meaning that they had in people's lives, and knew that I wanted to commit my career to local news. So I spent a year teaching journalism to college freshmen, and then I landed back in my hometown when our publisher, Chris, was beginning a fellowship at Stanford. He needed to hire an editor-in-chief, and so I was able to move home. And seeing your hometown through the eyes of a journalist is fascinating, because the role of the journalist is to investigate systems, right? And to understand how these things came to be the way that they are, and what happened when, and who was involved and who's involved now. And it's been fascinating for the last 3 years to drive around and walk around and see everything in such a new way.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
That's wild. So how long were you gone from Akron then in between?
Nearly a decade, I think 8 years.
And this is a little off topic, but I'm just curious, has Akron itself changed a lot in that time frame and then since then? Because I know Columbus, like in its trajectory, I wasn't away for very long. I was away at like college and then about a year, so only like 5 maybe total that I wasn't really living here. But I was just curious, like, did it also change a lot by the time you came back? Was there a lot to look into, a lot happening in Akron?
There are people who would say yes, and there are people who would say no. So generally speaking, Akron's population peaked in, I believe, 1960 at 300,000 people, and we have been getting smaller and smaller pretty steadily ever since. We did kind of bottom out about 10 years ago at about 190,000, and we're creeping back up, and we're close to 200,000 now. Some, you know, a variety of reasons for population growth, but over the last decade, there has been, I would say, a lot of investment in downtown Akron, in the university, seeking to, like so many cities across the country, right, seeking to draw people back to the city, but battling, you know, an aging housing stock, suburban school districts versus the city school district, just trying to convince people to either to stay or to come back or to settle there. We definitely have not seen the boom that Columbus has seen. We don't have cranes everywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I grew up with have moved to Columbus. But I think, you know, a lot of things are starting to fall into place as I think the city leaders would like them to. A lot of things also are not. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Thanks for running me through that, because, you know, I know a little bit here and there about Akron, but I just like to hear it from the source, kind of what things have been like there. So thank you so much for that. So this is your second or third journalism or job in the journalism industry?
Oh my gosh, when you put it that way. Yeah, I guess it's my third.
You're the editor-in-chief. That's pretty serious. Like, how has that been? You know, so I guess I want to take it back. You've been there for 6 years then? All 6 years that the Devil Strip has been?
No, I joined the Devil Strip in 2018.
Okay. So is that when they first hired like an editor-in-chief for the first time, or was there an editor-in-chief before you that had also been hired in?
There was a managing editor for a time, but I was the first person to hold the editor-in-chief title.
Wow. So you've probably built out a lot of the processes and things that y'all are working with now, I would imagine.
A number of processes, yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I have a bit of an idea then, and have given everyone else a bit of an idea then, that you have been pretty involved in getting this thing the last second half of kind of its tenure of being going for 6 years now. So that's a lot of really great experience that I would love to learn a little bit more from. And so one of the things that I'm interested in, and I'll have some more specific questions about this, but I just want to open it to you generally, is cultivating trust something that is specifically an aim of the Devil Strip, or something that you think the Devil Strip does put an emphasis on?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I mean, it's obviously important to us because if readers don't trust us, then what do we have? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was, thinking about all of the information you presented earlier. Something that I love about local news in particular is that I think we have a lot of ground that can be made up in the local sphere, because I think we as sort of a society and a populace still can kind of agree on more objective facts at the local level, because these are things that are happening right in front of us, right? It's that building's going up right there, or that protest took place right there, or that university announced this, and my dad went there, my brother goes there. These are things that we all personally have a stake in, that feels very tangible. Not that we don't have a stake in national events, but in a way that feels like, oh, this is about where I spend my money and where I spend my time. So I'm hopeful that if we can bring people together around local news, we can start to break down some of those barriers in terms of having conversations. As far as what we do to cultivate trust, we are a publication that takes a stated viewpoint, and I think we'll talk about this more later. But our point of view is pretty straightforward. It's, we live here, we care about the city. We try to encourage action that we deem good for our city. That means, shopping local, supporting local artists, being a good neighbor, voting, participating in civic life. We also try to call out bad actors, people who are, sort of corrupt in the traditional political sense. But other things that are bad for Akron, systemic racism is bad for Akron. Poverty is bad for Akron, because it's bad for our people. And so, we're able to kind of stand in that place and say, I live here. This city means a lot to me. That's the case with all of our staff. We want to sort of take ownership over the place. And so that's where we come from. And I think that has allowed us to connect with a lot of people, because we're able to say, hey, look, let's start from this shared value. I live here, you live here. We both want this place to prosper and to thrive. So what are we going to do about it? Yeah. And, the Devil Strip started really as kind of an arts and culture magazine, kind of an alt weekly. And Chris did that because, we've all seen this in our local newspapers. Something that we've lost is coverage of the arts and of culture and food and drink and the fun stuff, the stuff that made the news like enjoyable to read. And so the Devil Strip's ethos is very much, we're committed to covering the arts and culture. And although we've grown and gotten a little bit more like quote unquote serious over the last few years, that's still a really core part of who we are. And I've come to believe really strongly that well, of course we need to cover arts and food and small business and all this stuff, because how are we telling a true story of a community if we're not? If all we're covering is the city council and the school board and crime and court, those things are all incredibly important. But when you think about where the average person places their value and what they take joy in and what they get excited about, there's all this other stuff. And it's sort of that culture sector. So I think by really committing to covering those things, we've been able to cultivate trust too, because it's another way we can say to people, look, we love this stuff and you love this stuff. And we come from that shared place of, I want to support local business, so do you, and we're going to help you do that. Right. Rather than, presenting you with the way that listening to the news has felt all year, right? It's an absolute bummer. And not that we don't cover those things, but we can cover those things alongside a healthy dose of, hey, look at all these people who are doing good work.
Yeah. I think that's incredible. Why I'm hearing a feedback all the time. Are you hearing it on your end at all?
Not really. I can go grab a pair of headphones if it would help.
No, I think it was on my voice, but I think it's gone away.
Okay.
I can hear it just a little bit, but it's not too bad. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't seem like others could hear it. And I haven't gotten any messages yet. All right. So, yeah, that's really interesting, and I kind of had that perception that I was curious to hear more about that evolution, and it's so interesting that you all went from like more arts and culture and then transitioned to more serious topics, because I think probably the way we think about it, and we don't really have clear plans around this, but if I think about, matter covering more of that, the arts and culture stuff, I see it almost like coming after we get down the more serious stuff. So it's just interesting to see y'all do it kind of the opposite way. But I totally agree. We sometimes our work is just super heavy, and we felt like Columbus is such a big place that it would have been hard for us to do all of those things and well, and that wasn't really the gap that we saw in the Columbus market specifically. So we, for Matter, do mainly like real kind of heavier multimedia investigative work. Not all of it is super heavy, but it's really interesting that I'm assuming that Chris saw a market gap in Akron and saw that need for that at the time. And then clearly since then, and I don't know if you can speak a little bit, because I know a little bit, but not a lot about sort of the news landscape in Akron. I'm curious, this wasn't something I wanted to necessarily go into, but I was just super curious. Did you all decide to take on those more serious topics because, or why did you decide to? I'm not going to guess at why.
Yeah, I think it was just because we grew and our team grew. So this is something I'm really passionate about. But when I joined the Devil's Strip, we only had 2 full-time employees, and I was the only full-time journalist. And so everyone else working with us was a freelancer. We had 1 part-time reporter, and everybody else was a freelancer. And most of them do not have journalism degrees, or they didn't have any formal training. They just sort of said like, hey, I'd like to write about music, or I'd like to review new breweries. And we said, sure, anyone can learn how to do this.
Yeah.
Toolbox, and we'd love to give you that set of tools. And so I still work one-on-one with a few dozen community freelancers. We're constantly recruiting, constantly adding new people to the team. And those folks just grew a lot. After a year of writing about theater or music or whatever, people said, well, can I write about this zoning change in my neighborhood? Or can I write about the sewer project, which is this notorious infrastructure project that's been going on in Akron since before I was born? Or can I write about, the construction and now the decommissioning of this freeway that was built as part of urban renewal and displaced thousands of people, mostly from Black neighborhoods. And now it only carries 25% of the traffic that we expected it to carry, and the city's decommissioning it. It was this kind of natural growth of our community. And then we said, okay, yes, of course you can cover those things. And I think that was just a loop that fed itself. So in the summer of 2020, we were able to bring on that 1 part-time reporter was able to join us full-time. And then we hired 2 additional reporters through Report for America, which allowed us to really elevate our coverage of their beats are economic development, one is public health, and one is equity and inclusion. So they still write kind of fun feature stories. Our economic development reporter today published like 2 deep dives on budget cuts at the University of Akron, and then like a feature on Archie the Snowman, which is this 22-foot tall, like inflatable snowman that you can visit on Christmas and tell him your Christmas wishes. And he's been there, I did this as a child. So we still try to reflect that flavor of like, okay, we can do, understanding the challenges and the solutions alongside the fun stuff. But yeah, I think it was a matter of growth. I mean, in our market, we have a local daily paper, the Beacon Journal. They were bought by Gatehouse in 2018, which is now, of course, Gannett. We have a local NPR affiliate.
Owns the Columbus Dispatch and a bunch of other papers throughout Ohio. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And we have a local NPR affiliate that's based at Kent State, WKSU. We collaborate with the Beacon Journal and with WKSU. I have a lot of respect for the journalists there. But the fact of the matter is that, like all cities, we have a tiny fraction of the number of journalists we had 2 decades ago.
Right.
And so I think we would all say, whoever is in a position to hire journalists, let's hire journalists.
Wow. That's really interesting to hear more about I knew that you all had a lot of community members who contributed to you, and I had the feeling that they weren't all like journalists, and that's sort of how we have a bit of a mixed bag with Matter in terms of our contributors. Some of them are content more like journalists, and some are just like content creators that aren't necessarily trained in journalism, don't necessarily have that journalism background. And you know, hats off to y'all, because we've found so far like it's a lot of work to try to really mentor and work with people who don't necessarily have that background but have that desire to cover important issues in their community. And I'm sure that you found this too. Sometimes, you know, because of privilege and these biases in our systems, you know, to be able to have people that can tell those stories from the communities that need to be told. Some of those people don't have journalism degrees, and we do have to find content creators in the community that can tell stories, and we sometimes have to work with them and give them those skills. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about like why that's important to y'all versus having like a small little team of news reporters or people that create all of your content, which I assume you'd be able to create more content, because that's something we find is we're not able to crank out as much content, which is not our aim anyway as a newsroom, because we're working with so many different people, and that requires a lot of management, and it's, you know, a lot of work. So I'm just curious, because I would think, and this is what we think for Matter, that cultivating trust in the community, there's no better way to do that than to have your newsroom come from the community themselves, and for your contributors and a lot of the people who are making your content and editing it and whatnot, ideally being from various parts of the community, having different identities and different places that they come from within the community. So yeah, if you would speak a little bit more on how much the Devil Strip values that, and what you all have to put into and sacrifice to be able to operate that way as a newsroom, whereas most newsrooms do it the more traditional, have a small little news team thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tremendous amount of work in terms of sort of the number of hours that are put in on something that somebody with a journalism degree might be able to knock out in a couple of hours, might take somebody this is their first time writing a story. You know, it's going to take a little bit longer. But for me, that's incredibly important because it's important to me that our publication reflects that it's told in the voices of the community. You know, it shouldn't just be the voices of 3 people who gave the 3 of us or the 4 of us. We're now a team of 4, you know, the authority to tell these stories just because we happen to be here. You know, and I, as an editor, strive to sort of preserve the voices of writers, even if they're not sort of the exacting way that I would write something. It allows us to cover a much wider variety of stories. Because we have people who are plugged in a bunch of different neighborhoods, in a bunch of different scenes, we find out about stuff really early. Oftentimes because a writer gives us a heads up and says like, hey, so-and-so who I've worked with is writing this new play. Is there, you know, I can't cover this because it'd be a conflict of interest, but is there somebody else who would? Or, you know, hey, I just noticed this business open, like this new taco truck has been showing up. I'm going to go down there and talk to them. It allows us to have, you know, eyes all over the city in ways that we wouldn't normally, especially, you know, in the time of COVID, I go like 2 places, right? And I have one route that I drive. And this way, you know, we're kind of able to be out all over the city constantly. And I've always found that, you know, the more, how do I say this well? When we invest in people, I mean, just the way that people grow is incredible. I mean, these are the skills of being a good journalist. I mean, asking questions, you know, kind of sitting with your curiosity and thinking about what are the things I want to know? How do I want to ask? Actually having that conversation, picking up the phone and calling somebody and asking them for something, spending time making them feel comfortable, making them feel safe, treating them with respect. I mean, when you interview someone, like that's a real trust relationship. You know, writing a piece that does justice to them. These are all like incredibly important skills in terms of just being a good neighbor and being a good participant in democracy. And it sounds a little bit kind of high and mighty, but I really do believe this. I mean, the more people we can, not that we can sort of train everyone in the city. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that.
One day.
But, you know, the more folks who we can sort of turn on to this set of skills, maybe those people go on to just be really great neighbors and organize, neighborhood associations and participate in those things. Maybe they get involved in activism or in politics. Maybe they, just become really outspoken advocates for local business. I'd rather have, 40 of those people than, one journalist just sort of churning out stories, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I agree. That's completely what we're trying to do with our model as well. And, I think news, especially, and just the nature of who makes the news and how white and male those people are, we have a duty as people that want to see the news industry evolve and become more reflective of the community to try to spread that skill and knowledge. I know that we have grand ambitions through Matter to do all kinds of constant workshops on all kinds of skills that we would provide to our team and the community, but especially with COVID, especially with funding restrictions, we're still trying to figure that one out. So heads up to any funders out there. We want to help spread journalism skills to the community. That's awesome. Well, we've talked a lot about your contributors and sort of how they contribute and by nature of how many of them there are and where they come from the community. That they really cultivate trust because they come from the community themselves. I'm also interested to hear a bit more about your funding model, because I know it's a little bit different than what we've got going on, but not, similar in certain ways. So for those of you who might not be familiar, for Matter, we operate as a nonprofit and owners, and we do refer to them as members. They are members of our organization who donate monthly, and they get certain perks for being members and things like that. So that's one funding model. It's just really kind of the classic donor funding model. I think something that probably a lot less people have heard of, especially when it comes to news, is the co-op model. And I don't even want to start to go in to try to explain what that is and how it's implemented in your case. So I would love for you just to talk a little bit about that model. I know that's not the model you've had traditionally the whole time. And so why that change and how might that contribute to cultivating trust?
Yeah, so we are cooperatively owned. We transitioned into this model in early 2020, sort of just as the pandemic hit. So it was not the smoothest thing in the world, but what it means basically is that we are owned by, at this point, 600 or 700 people. So when someone becomes a member of the Devil Strip, we too have a relatively traditional membership. You get sort of exclusive access to events and you get, merch and stuff. But when you become a member, you also you're also buying a share in the cooperative. You can buy in for as little as $1 a month. Each person only gets one share. You cannot, buy 51% of shares and stage a hostile takeover. And then each year our shareholders elect a board, which kind of governs us, kind of like a traditional nonprofit board would. Mm-hmm. And then, one seat on that board is reserved for somebody who has earned their share via contributions to the magazine. So we pay all of our writers, photographers, people who deliver the print magazine for us, et cetera. But we also recognize that once you've done work, once we've sort of paid you a certain amount, you've also earned a lifetime share in the co-op. So the workers also get to elect a representative on that board. And the shareholders get, throughout the coming year, the shareholders will get to vote on sort of issues of, broad directional issues of the magazine. I, as an editor, would love for our shareholders to vote on kind of topics they'd like our reporters to dig into, kind of framing it as what are you most curious about? Tell us, and we'll go find we're professional answers of questions. We'll go find those answers for you. So ensuring that the community really does steer the ship. I mean, in terms of kind of the back office stuff, in terms of, approving our budgets and making sure that we're achieving our sort of corporate goals, but also in terms of setting the agenda at a broad level for our coverage. We do have conflict of interest policies in terms of if the owner of this company happens to be one of our members, that person can't email me and say hello, could you please do a story on us? I'm a shareholder. They don't get any special treatment, just as a newspaper wouldn't give a subscriber any special treatment, or I'm sure you guys wouldn't give a member any special treatment. Right. But yeah, the idea is, we're aligning our profit motives with our values. So we've talked a lot about, being of and from and by the community. And this is just one more way of doing that. So allowing the community to really tell us what they need from their local news.
Yeah, you've certainly baked it in there, I think, with the funding model, with your, editorial model generally. And it's just really interesting because there's this debate that I've been tapped into since I've been getting into this news industry stuff the last couple of years, because I'm not a journalist traditionally, not from the news industry, not from that world at all. But what I've come to realize is there's a bit of a debate about this funding model thing and what's the most viable funding model for the future of journalism, given that, sort of the traditional newspaper. I'm saying this for people that are listening. I'm sure you understand this, but for people that are listening, the traditional, if you haven't been tuned in already to us droning on about this in our other episodes, the news industry, traditional newspaper industry, very much on the decline. Rosalie was mentioned this, but in Akron, in Columbus, across Ohio, we've lost upwards of 40 to 70% of journalists within the last, depending on what time period you're looking at, the last years, the last decade or so. And so there's this big debate about what will kind of rise out of the ashes. And so one of the models that we believe very strongly in is the nonprofit model. That's what we chose. But at the time, I don't know that we were considering, we just pretty much were like, okay, well, for-profit or nonprofit, we know we want to go nonprofit. I don't know at the time that I, at least, and maybe Jalen did, because she's been, in the industry longer. But I wasn't familiar with the option of being a co-op. I never even considered that. And it's interesting because it seems like in a lot of ways, not in every way, but the co-op and the nonprofit model are very similar, other than the fact that, nonprofit versus for-profit thing, and the shareholder thing working a little bit differently. I really love how much you've baked that into your board, and not every company, unless you are a nonprofit, you are legally liable for having a board, but you all have a fully functional community board, even without that being a legal requirement from what I understand. I could be wrong about that, because I know that you usually still have some kind of board, but it seems like you guys are going above and beyond what a typical company would do. I don't know about for a co-op, that might be very typical.
I'm not the right person to ask about what is legally required. I don't want to misspeak. Our bylaws do say we have to have a board. And we, the staff, we sort of interviewed a bunch of community folks, and we sat the first board. But this spring, half of that board my understanding is that half the board will sort of agree to have served a one-year term, and then there'll be elections. So we won't have the whole board coming up for elections at the same time. But yeah, from here on out, the shareholders get to decide who they seat on that board.
Wow. Yeah, and I don't know all the ins and outs of that either, but it seems like your board is definitely very, very community oriented and very, very thoughtful in terms of who you put on it and where those people come from. So interested by that. So thank you for walking us through that more. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit more honed in on then the editorial process. So we talked about the people that fund it and create the work. But what I know that we had been part of a webinar that you all hosted or helped host, where you all dove into some of your editorial policies, and you've already mentioned a couple of them with the conflicts of interest are also there, and having certain policies in place that really insulate you from what I think this whole debate about nonprofit, for-profit, whatever thing is really about, which is the idea is which of these models, I think the whole argument is least susceptible to corruption, is most grounded in community or the people that it's supposed to be serving. And so I'm interested in what you all have put in place with your editorial policies and processes that kind of cultivate that trust, because I've seen some of them in that webinar we attended, and it just blew me away. Some of the things that you guys articulated really well that we as Matter really value as a newsroom. Is there anything you could pull out that you think is, and especially anything that you think is kind of unique or just really has steered you in that way?
Yeah, so we had what started out as a code of conduct. It has grown into an editorial handbook, which is about 6 pages long, and I have open right now. This is very much a living document. We believe, like, obviously we're a young organization, we're a growing organization. Every year we're going to face new stuff that we never covered a pandemic before, had to figure that out. So we are sort of adding to it as we say, okay, protests after the murder of George Floyd are a really good example. We were sort of like, oh boy, we've never really covered protests before. How are we as the Devil Strip going to respond to this? And then after a month or so, we kind of sat back and did a postmortem and said, what did we do? Did it serve the community? Did it give the community things that did we just duplicate the work of other journalists, or, what did we offer that was exceptional? And I think we try to do that continually, just to say, okay, what did we try? Did it work? If not, why not? If so, what was it about it that was a success? But yeah, I mean, we focus sort of in equal parts on the process itself and then on the product. So, during the process, we have these core beliefs, which are sort of, we believe a single person can affect change, and, no story is too small. We believe that reporting with nuance takes time, earning trust takes time. We're not going to sacrifice the process at the expense of those relationships. We believe our journalists are also members of the community. They are neighbors. Our sort of first duty is to be good neighbors, that sort of thing. And then we think about how our stories operate as products. So, each story should, and we outline this in bullet points. This is not on our website yet, but it really ought to be. So I will make it a point to get that done this week, so folks can go find it if they want to.
Screenshot it, and I would love a copy.
But yeah, we say, readers to participate in and support local arts and culture, to prioritize locally owned businesses. We seek to help readers better understand complex issues, not denying that these things are complex, but saying, hey, come on, we can figure this out together. And then of course we have pretty traditional journalism standards as far as accuracy and fairness. Everything we publish is true. If we find out it's not, we run a correction immediately. Sources know that they're being interviewed. They know who they're being interviewed by, for what purpose, et cetera. My approach to policy making of this sort is basically, the more transparent we can be with our community, the better off we are. All of us are human. All of us are going to make mistakes. We're going to get things wrong. But I think this is kind of similar to telling the community where we stand as far as being, what we're about. Yeah. When it comes to objectivity, this is what we're about as far as our process and the product we're trying to put out. And when we fall short, here's what we'll do. We're not telling you that we're going to be perfect all the time, and we're not telling you that what we publish is gospel, but we're telling you, here's what we did to create this thing, and here's what we hope it will do for you. I think those things are important. And I think, that said, I don't think the average reader is going on to the average news website and reading their code of ethics. Yeah. But I think it's important that we have it there, which is why I'm going to put it on the website this week. Just so we can always point to it and say, hey, folks, this is what we're about. If you're curious, go check it out. Yeah. If this is for you, great. Welcome to our community.
Yeah, and I think we don't necessarily have anything. Well, we have certain policies on our website. Like, there's some really basic ones that I think a lot of grants require, and our fiscal sponsor recommended. So it's not like we don't have any policies on there, but we too want to add more of our detailed, because some of them we already have outlined on our internal team site for people that we onboard. And we haven't necessarily hesitated to put them out, but I think my interest is in, because you were saying a lot of people aren't going to go to your website and necessarily read, especially if it's written oh, here's a big long policy just kind of written out. I think what would be really interesting, and I'm sure some publications have done more of this, is taking some time, and I'm sure that's why we haven't done it yet, to sit down and make some graphics that kind of explain some of that. And we did that with our republishing guide recently. We created graphics that explain, that are a little bit more, well, we may not have created the whole guide in graphics, but we created at least a little guide that gives an idea that we republished. And I think the idea was we can create little graphics that just give some quick republishing information. And then I think the same idea I was having for some of the policies that we use and the ways that we approach our journalism, because some people do. And it's really, I'm sure you guys you're finding this out, as we're growing and we're gaining more of an audience, you're going to have people who question what you do and whether you're trustworthy. And there's going to be some people who might not like some of the things you report, or that just are very skeptical of the news for good reason. And, you know, being able to point to those things, not only that, but also to have them as sort of a standard for the rest of the community. Like I said, I mean, we look at other newsrooms like y'all, like, what are your policies? How have you worded this? How have you communicated it to your community, the ways that you kind of safeguard your processes from being kind of infiltrated by special interests and things like that. So I really appreciate you kind of walking us through that, because it just, yeah, y'all being around for 6 years, you've just done, it seems like you've really grown a lot as an organization and just like in the community and sort of the role that you've played. And another thing I think that just speaks to y'all's cultivating trust in the community is that you have probably evolved, it sounds like, in ways that Chris may not have foreseen when he started the Devil Strip, but you were receptive to those things. And that's what we tried to build in, because our Matter model is a little bit more defined in terms of what in terms of what we will cover. So there's less room in some ways, but we've tried to do within those subjects, we've tried to create a lot of ways for people to give input. And it just seems like you all, and to kind of steer the direction, we weren't going to open our next investigation until 2025, and then the uprisings in Columbus started happening, and we felt compelled to open a policing investigation because we were getting an outcry from our community. Right. We just couldn't ignore that, and we are community informed, so strive to be. So we were like, you know what, this wasn't in the plans, it's not part of the model in what we imagined, but we need to listen to the community. And so I really commend you all for sort of delving in. And I'm sure it wasn't easy to go from the lighter stuff to the more heavier stuff. I mean, now that we're covering policing, we have to worry about a whole new realm of serious things that you're reporting on, investigative work that you have to be concerned with, you know, even more than some of those other topics.
Well, and you know this, but whenever you start covering a new beat, you kind of have to try to become an expert on that thing in a very short amount of time. And, you know, we've added a public health reporter to our staff, and I'm not a public health expert. There's so many things I don't know, and they've been doing fabulous coverage of COVID, but I as an editor feel like I need to be so careful to make sure that our language is precise and accurate. And I know our reporter, they take it incredibly seriously as well, but it's a hard thing to just pick up and say, oh, I'm going to cover this now. And that's why you see so many journalists over the course of their career develop these specialties and say, I cover real estate, or I cover courts. You know, they're just pros at those processes and systems, and they know how to figure out what's going on. Whereas when we're first learning, it takes a lot longer.
Yeah. And we don't get the fun of covering some of the lighter topics at Matter, but that is one of the things that we really built into our model was if we're going to be covering, especially that's our focus is work. We wanted to make sure we do that right. And that's why we're only focusing on a couple issues at a time. We are starting to look more like this now that we actually have a few of us that are paid. But we really, once we're like a full blown news organization with multiple employees, we intend to have a team all the way from, photographer, photojournalist, to writers, to editor, all the way on up, that are all working on one specific investigation. So for example, our policing investigation or our development investigation, so that they really develop over the course of that investigation that expertise that they need, that they can talk more appropriately on that subject, gain even more sources and insight, and to be able to, improve their coverage as they go along. So I appreciate kind of that point too. And I appreciate that it's probably very difficult considering y'all are small and also covering so many different things for one community. That's a big task for a small organization. So hats off to y'all. I'm sure it's hard work.
Yeah, well, and I think it makes that transparency all the more important, because rather than saying, hey folks, I'm going to get this right every single time, we're able to come from a position of, here's what we're about, here's how we're doing the work, and here's what we'll do if we make a mistake. And I think the more upfront about that we can be, the more honest we can be about the work that we're doing.
Definitely. Absolutely. I really appreciate that. So we are getting closer to 8 o'clock, so we'll start wrapping up. I don't think I'm seeing any comments in the feeds. I'm unfortunately not logged into the Instagram, and those disappear as you log in and out. So I don't know if there were any on there. But what I'm going to do is just do a quick wrap up. Thank you to our sponsors, Night Road Studio, Wild Goose Creative. This is a part of our fundraiser, these weekly Matter Monday events. We are raising awareness for sort of the issues with the news industry, what the solutions look like here in Columbus and beyond, like in Akron. And we do appreciate if you are inclined to donate. There's a $5 suggested donation. It's been scrolling on the bottom, and you can do that at matternews.org/donate. And then before we log off, I want to hear from Rosalie. Where can people find you? I'm sure at your website and everything, but like website, social media, where can everyone tap in with the Devil Strip and you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are, our website is thedevilstrip.com. Devil is one word, strip is one word. There's no like apostrophes in there. We are on Facebook at The Devil Strip, on Instagram at The Devil Strip, on Twitter at Akron Devil Strip, slightly different. Yeah, I'd encourage you to follow us, take a look. If you or you have any loved ones who are from Akron, hopefully it'll be a really fun way to see the city with new eyes. If you are anywhere in the state of Ohio, you can become a co-owner. So you'll see at the top of the homepage a button right at the top left that says join the co-op, and you can click there to learn everything that you need to learn. I am on Twitter at RozMurph, RozMurph. The Devil Strip retweets me, so I'm sure you'll find me in that feed. But I'm happy to answer questions that folks have, or if you're interested in learning more about what we do. It's always a pleasure to talk about. So thank you so much, Cassie, for having me.
Thank you so much for being on. We will be back next week. I think we have 2 or 3 more episodes of Matter Monday, depending on how many more Mondays are in this month. And so catch us next Monday, also at 7 p.m. on all of these platforms. And thank you again to Rosalie Murphy from The Devil Strip. Definitely check them out. Community news at its finest. And we appreciate all of you for tuning in, and hope you stay safe and have a good night.
Thanks so much.
And Isaiah, you can cut the feeds now. I'm assuming you're doing so, but thank you all. We're signing out.